So the federal poverty level, or FPL, was created by the federal government in the 1960s really as a proxy for how much families spend on food in a month or in a year. And in essence, that very, very simple calculation has not been changed to account for the fact that food only accounts for 1/7 of a family budget as opposed to 1/3 back in the 1960s, and obviously does not account for any geographic variations for cost of living.
The federal poverty level is really irrelevant to most families in this country if we want them to think about and plan for and prepare for economic security. I think that there are a whole variety of ways in which the measure should be changed. It is based on a 1950s model of families, which did not include women working outside the home, so there wasn't a child care cost, which for many families in New York City can be even more than what they're paying for monthly rent.
The federal poverty level as a measurement really doesn't adequately explain the economic stresses that are going on in families. And we know in Michigan that what's going on in Traverse, the county in some of the northern areas have no connection at all to what's going on in Wayne County. And you just can't use the same numbers to really compare the difference for child care, for example, or transportation, or for rent. So, we really need a measure that reflects the differences all over the state and then all over the country.
I'm an economist in Washington, D.C. I used to work in the White House, so I'm in meetings where I'm trying to argue on behalf of anti-poverty measures, for example. I need metrics that actually show the impact of what we're doing. It's not that complicated, and you'd think, well, don't we already have that? In fact, no. The official poverty measure is the best example. It fails to take into account precisely those parts of our anti-poverty agenda that have grown the fastest. So the absence of that metric is a real disadvantage when you're in that kind of a setting.
Well, I think it underestimates how many families and individuals are struggling in the United States or in your local community. So, for example, if we say, 1 in 7 kids are poor, that does not sound like a disaster or a crisis. But when you say 1 of every 2 kids are living in households where they struggle to meet their basic needs, that's a different conversation. And that really kind of goes back to why the appropriate metrics really matter.
And we need to tie it very carefully with values. So we're not just measuring things to measure things. We actually are tying it to who we want to be and who we think we are. And there's an old adage, which is that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. So we don't really know anything about, if any way of knowing if we're moving in the right direction, then everything goes, nothing goes.
When we think about progressive policy reforms, particularly from a racial justice lens, and we do work with particularly low-wage workers and on the economy and on what we call a just economy, we can't translate our stories to policymakers without metrics. And so the way we derive data, the way we translate data for policymakers and then use the stories, it matters. And so metrics matter in a deep way to our work. It's how we win.
Ultimately, the relationship of numbers to people is just to make visible that situation, and we still need to have the language that describes what it means to lose the opportunity of somebody's genius because they didn't learn how to read or because their parents weren't kind and loving to them because they didn't have the time working 3 jobs. So, it's the stories behind the numbers that also matter.